Hello and welcome back to another video tutorial here at Geekatplay Studios. My name is Gary Miller and we are finishing up our trunk tutorial, and we have finished modeling it, and now we are going to apply some textures to it. Before we do though, I want to go over a little procedure that I did, and I want to explain why I did it. If you're very familiar with modeling, then this will be a waste of time for you, because I'm sure you will already know the reason why I did what I did. Let me just level this out here. Okay. If you recall, when we were modeling our tree trunk, when the trunk was in this position, it had a solid surface up here, and I had deleted it before I went and grabbed my edges here and then just and started distorting the lip of the tree. And I said the reason why I deleted it, but we would recreate it later, was because we would run into some possibly some texturing problems and certainly some geometry problems. So consider this kind of backtracking to the position that the stump was in earlier in the first tutorial. And so I'm going to hit my self-selection. I'm just going to grab some edges here and pretend like I'm starting all over and pulling it up, pulling it up. Okay, let's say that that's the look that I want. Fine and dandy. Let's go and select the face that's going to be our tree rings on Vertex Modeling tab. Come up here and extract. Okay, so here is going to be our tree rings by not deleting the tree rings like I did at the beginning. And we are going to do a little bit of a comparison here as we go to texture map this, and you will see why I did what I did. So let's get on to texture mapping now. I'm going to click on this little arrow here. It pulls out the tab for my materials. I'm going to create a new material, call it stump, MP, and I'm going to come down here to color, and I don't want to create a color. I want to use a texture image that I've got on my desktop, and there it is. Doesn't that look great? I'm going to come down here to my tree rings, create another material, rings, and I'm going to choose a texture for that as well. And that's, well, yeah, that's all I'm going to do. Okay, this is the default position that Hexagon is putting these textures on, and it looks pretty poor. So we're going to need to do some repair work. Before we do that, let me show you what my end cut image looked like. And I think this is pretty well centered in the window here. This is an image I got from sharecg.com. It's very high resolution. It's just under a megabyte, and it's going to work great for this example tutorial. So if you don't have any in cuts of log, showing in grain, that sort of thing, head on over to sharecg.com and probably type in your search by using end cuts or tree rings, wood grain, something along those lines, and just spend a few minutes. These are some really good-looking textures. So this is this is the texture we're going to use. It's just the object itself in the middle of this square picture, and around the texture we've got all this white area, and that is displayed here in our image. on our tree ring object. We've got our tree ring object, this circular disc here, right in the middle of our wood image, and you see all the white area around the outside. Well, fortunately, we can fix that quite easily. Come up here to UV and paint, this little tab right up there. Click on that, and we're gonna do the tree rings first. That's gonna be the easiest thing to do. And I'm gonna come up here and select planar projection. You've got 5 projection settings that you can use to project your texture image onto your object. Think about it in terms of like a film projector projecting the film image onto a wall. If it's a nice flat wall, you'll see a nice image. If you were trying to project that image from the film projector onto like a globe, a sphere, it's going to get distorted because of the curvature of the sphere. So UV tools typically allow you to bend or distort the texture image to properly fit around your object. Now, before we go into UV mapping this, I want to explain a few things. When I first started getting into 3D computer graphics, I saw time and time again the terms UV mapping, UV coordinates, etc., and I had no idea what it was. I didn't know what it meant. I could not, for the life of me, find any sort of tutorial that adequately explained it to me in very basic layman terms. I just could not understand. I was familiar with X, Y, and Z coordinates as they apply to 3D objects, but what is this UV mapping? Well, I have gone on to learn a great deal about UV mapping, so now I understand. So if you are confused about what the UV coordinates are and how this whole procedure works, let me spend just a few moments and try to clarify some things. Let's start first with X, Y, and Z. These are all familiar concepts. When you create an object, a three-dimensional object in 3D space, you are dealing with 3 axes or 3 coordinates that allows you to manipulate the object you are creating. Up and down is always Y. Horizontal, back and forth, that's always your x-axis, and your depth to and from, closer to you and further away, that's always your z-axis. So you've got 3 coordinates to manipulate and create your 3D objects. And that makes sense. 3 dimensions, height, width, and depth, that's pretty clear. But what is UV mapping? Well, 3D objects uses 3 coordinates, x, y, and z, height, width, and depth. A UV map pertains to an image, a texture image, just like that tree ring picture that we looked earlier. And that has only 2 dimensions to it. It's like it's like a photograph. It has height and it has width. There are no 3 dimensions to it. So the height coordinate is the V coordinate. Think of it as vertical, V for vertical, and the U coordinate has to do with the one that goes across this direction. So as we start getting into texturing our little model here, you will see how we can manipulate our object and the photograph to properly texture our image. So with that as kind of a very brief introduction, we've got our materials assigned to our objects. Let's go into rings, and we are in the UV and paint mode. Now what I want to do is I want to apply my, looking down a top-down view of my tree rings, I want to apply my picture directly onto my surface here in a flat manner, just like taking a picture and putting it flat on a desktop. And if you notice, you have several projection settings. You have a sphere, you've got a cylinder, you've got a plane, a cube, and you have this global thing, I forget what, projection editor, where you can manipulate, create further manipulations. If we were working with an object that was like a sphere, and if you were working with the head of a character, of a model, that would apply. Something that is spherical in shape, you would probably want to start off using your spherical projection. If you were using something that resembled a cylinder, very much like our tree trunk, which we're going to use the cylinder projection on, you'd want to use a cylinder. Well, this is just my tree rings are just a flat surface. So I want to use the plane or projection setting. Custom UVs replaced by a new gizmo? Yes. Okay. We are going to apply our texture image onto our flat surface here by using the Y coordinates. You can play around with the X and the Z, but you're going to get some distortion in your image. But by the Y, and Y is always up and down like I explained earlier, now it's like taking that photograph like a flat piece of paper and plopping it down directly onto our tree ring object. So that's the projection mode that I want. I'm going to hit validate. Now I'm going to come up here to unfold. Now on my object here, let me get a better look at it. Okay, on my object here, wherever I select on my object, that is reflected on my UV map. And all these little lines in here, let me select them. All my lines, this is the map. This is the UV map that the program to enable me to stretch and project my photograph, my texture image, onto my object. Well, as you see, my UV map kind of goes outside of the boundaries of this wood image and onto these white areas. And you see that here in, and you see that here. And that's not what we want. So we need to do just a little bit of modifying. And this is actually a good introduction to UV mapping, because we can be very sloppy using this, and no one would be the wiser. So I hit UV unfold. That's what I like. I'm going to hit validate. Now I'm going to start manipulating some of these points. Now this point that I just selected is reflected here in my perspective view. Watch what happens when I move this down. Notice that white part's gone. I'll Control Z and undo it, and I'll do it again. So in order to remove that white area, or to put it another way, in order to fit our UV map on the portion of our texture image that we want it to appear on, all we have to do is, well, one, we can select all of them and move the whole thing around. We can scale it down. You can scale it on your U and V axis. I'm just going to set it right here, right in the center, and grow it out just a little bit. And the areas that overlap, I'll just do a little repair job on. So I'll select that one, bring it down here, maybe bring this one down just a little bit. Those look good. This one could come in just a little bit. That one just a little bit. This one needs some attention. And there you go. Let's look at our model now. And we've got a perfect wood grain texture image right on our tree rings. So I'm very pleased with that. This went very smoothly, very easy, because it's just a flat surface. This one was pretty simple. Now before we get on to the stump, I want to show you something that you need to be aware of if you use textures that are a little bit more intricate than a tree stump. If you, looking at the geometry of our texture map, of our UV map, it is identical to the geometry of our tree ring object. If you start distorting the geometry too much, watch what happens here. Your texture gets all stretched and you lose the integrity of the image that you are trying to project onto it. With this particular material, this tree ring that we are putting on here, we can do a lot of manipulating and it really won't show too much. We can get away with a lot and cheat. You really wouldn't know that this was stretched here if you hadn't just seen me do it. But let's say this texture was a brick wall where it has very definite horizontal lines and very definite vertical lines. When you start stretching the geometry, there your brick wall is going to start taking on this characteristic, where that stretched part appears on it. And you're going to probably be wondering, well, what's going on? How come it's so out of whack? Well, you need to try to preserve your the geometry of your UV map as much as possible so that you have a clean projection of your texture onto your object. I hope that was explanatory. So we're done with the tree rings that we created. Now let's hide this and let's bring up the second tree ring that we created, which would have been the first one had we not deleted this face in the initial stage of our creating the stump. Let's come up here to planar projection, and it is projecting a checkerboard onto here, and this is our UV map. We want Y, validate. Notice if I didn't hit the Y, it looked really poor, especially how it was projected here onto our tree ring object. So let's validate that. I'm happy with that. Let's do a little render here and see what this will look like. Okay, let's come up here to select edges. I'm just going to hit Control A and select all the edges. Well, now that's strange. There's no geometry. There's only a perimeter geometry. Where are all the lines in the middle? The other tree ring, if I hit Control A, I have perimeter lines, but I have all these other ones in the middle that conform to the surface of this object. But in this one I don't. That is because this contains n-gons, which are essentially polygons with more than 4 sides. If you look at this object, all of these polygons, all of them have 4 sides. Unfortunately, this one is just one polygon, and it has, well, however many, it has 16 sides to it. And an ingon is anything more than 4 sides, and some 3D rendering programs have a difficult time rendering ingons. So in order to see what this geometry actually looks like, let's come over here to Utilities, come over here, triangulate in applying non-planar facets, come down here to the second one, and let's click on whatever it said, triangulate ingons. So now this is our texture. This is the geometry that the program creates on this tree, on this object, which we're going to use for our tree rings. Okay, fine. Well, let's apply our tree ring object to it and see what we've got. Let's Control A, validate that. Control A to select all my edges. Let's put this in here. And that looks okay, but what if we want to adjust this point right here? What if we adjust it, every single other face that's assigned to this object is also affected. And it reduces our ability to work with this where there are better ways to work with it. Not only that, but trust me, if you bring this into view and you render it, you're going to notice it's going to look a little odd because of the geometry that this has created, as opposed to this one that has nice, clean, 4-sided polygons and very good layout of its geometry. So that's why I did not allow Hexagon to create the tree rings by default. I went and created them myself, and as a result I ended up with a lot better, better looking object with much better geometry. Okay, so that with that as our tree rings, let's come down here to our stump, and we're going to come back to UV Paint. Let's do cylinder. We're going to project our texture map onto this, and Hexagon will treat it as if it were a cylinder. And I need to select my tree ring. Now select cylinder. Now what I need to do is I need to rotate my cylinder 90 degrees so it's up and down, and then just put this onto my tree stump. And make sure it's aligned along the y-axis. You can experiment with the X and the Z if you want, but I think you will find the Y is a much better place to begin with. And this is 23 minutes into this tutorial. I'm going to stop it here and finish up the last few minutes texturing this thing in Hexagon with a third video. So thanks for watching here at Geekatplay Studios. My name's Gary Miller. Have a good day.